Hello, it's Sarah here, and today I want to get some fabrics dyed and stenciled ready for future projects. And I thought I'd put on the camera and share some more process with you. What I've got in front of me is a range of fabric scraps that I've already been playing with. So I love to have these, like my kind of collage papers, in my stash, ready to go for a project where I feel that it's going to fit or catches my eye. And so I like to try and create kind of fabrics in different kind of color combinations. So I've got a lot of variety to choose from. My stash is running a bit low. So today I'm just going to share three very simple, or maybe four, very simple techniques with you in terms of ways that I bring colour and pattern to my fabrics. As you can see here, I've got a bit of stenciling. On this one, I've used some Lindy's Magicals, explosion powders, any of those kind of water reactive pigments, brushos all work great. I'm going to show you how I dye my fabrics with acrylic inks, which is probably something I do quite a lot. All of these have been done with acrylic inks. Um, and they give you a lovely variegated look. You can't predict the outcome. So I think in the same dyeing session, I got both this, which has got lots of fantastic texture in it, almost like a landscape, and a softer, more even distribution of colour. So you just don't know what you're going to get when you kind of soak your fabrics in acrylic ink. But you get some beautiful colour, and as you can see, it doesn't really change the texture of the fabric too much. We've got some fabrics here where, again, some more stenciling. I also want to show you how I use ink tense blocks. The rainbow here was created using ink tense blocks on the fabric, and also some wax resist. So I'll show you how you can be drawing or create marks on your fabrics with wax crayons and then creating a resist with the way that you add the colour. So there's lots of fantastic ways. Basically, you're treating your fabric like paper. Now, I should say before we get started that I'm not creating these fabrics with the view to them being washed. They're going to go into kind of my journals and decorative items. So I'm not using techniques here that are going to be kind of wash proof. You can use acrylic paints with a fabric medium that will make them uh, kind of possible for you to wash them. And of course, the fabric medium also will ensure that the fabric doesn't become too stiff. If you use a lot of heavy body acrylics on your fabrics without any fabric medium or without thinning them down, then your fabric could become quite stiff, which is great if you're going to be stitching on it or doing something decorative, but not necessarily if you want to use it for something that you're going to wash later. So these are all very much just decorative fabrics for use in my mixed media projects. The kind of fabrics that I'm going to work with are super simple and very easy to access. Just some cheap either muslins or basic cottons here that you can get online. I just tear them down into smaller panels, and they take the colour really beautifully, and they're a nice kind of midweight, light to midweight, so they're great if you're going to stitch on them or do collage. I've also got here a bit of a kind of old shirt, which has kind of got a bit of a cheeseclothy pattern in it. So I'll be interested to see how that takes the colour. But again, it's a light cotton. And some kind of broderie on glaze. Anyway, kind of lacy style fabric here as well. All offcuts and bits of scraps. I would recommend that you use kind of cotton or natural fibres fabric to take the colour rather than things like polyesters. But say old sheets, old shirts, um, bits of basic muslin and canvas will do the job perfectly for you. So I'm going to get some bits and bobs out and just show you how I'm going to add some colour and pattern to these pieces of plain fabric. First off, we're just going to apply some acrylic inks to our fabrics, and we'll leave them to sit for quite a long time. I normally leave them overnight, just to allow that colour to soak into the fabric and dry off. Um, all I've got here is the lid of a plastic box. something basically that's just going to hold the liquid and the acrylic ink, and that I can kind of put a number of pieces of fabric in. This is a process that I quite often do with both fabrics and paper, so I'll dye my papers and fabrics at the same time. We'll just play with fabrics today. And it really is as simple as putting a healthy amount of water in the base of the lid, and then I'm going to go with fairly neutral colours today because that's the kind of fabrics I'm running low on, is the kind of the vintage distressed looking ones. So I've got some sepia ink here. This is a Dale Rowney one. I've got some transparent burnt umber from Liquitex. And there really is no rhyme or reason to how much ink I'm putting in. As you'll see, I'll keep layering some ink up. I've got some yellow oxide here. And then I'll encourage that cord to move around a little bit before we put our fabric in. You could wet the fabric. It doesn't really make too much of a difference because before you put it in, because we're going to wet it thoroughly as we go through this as well. And what I like about this process is the unpredictability of the results, because sometimes you get a quite a mottled look, sometimes you get a quite even coverage, and it really depends on how the fabrics are sitting. The different types of fabrics will take colours differently, and just how the colours end up moving around and over these pieces of fabric. And of course, we're leaving them to sit for a fair amount of time, so it all soaks through. So certainly don't look at trying to do any kind of composition or planning here, because you just don't know what will end up happening. Sometimes adding the paper layers when you're dyeing both paper and fabric together is really interesting, because the paper can kind of sort of take up some of the texture of the fabric that it's sitting on top of. So you can add some texture to your papers that way. You can see how wet I'm making everything. It really is gonna be soaking through. Now, what you can do as well is I've got some Lindy's here. Let's go with the Opal Sea Oats. So this is a kind of a water reactive powder. If you've got Brushos, explosion powders, the infusions from Paper Artsy, all of those will obviously react with all of the moisture you're putting in here, and you can sometimes get quite nice speckled effects where there are slightly denser selections of the pigment as it sits on the fabric. So I'll just get a brush to pick up some of the powder. This might be a bit pale actually in terms of the colour we've already got. Oh, it looks like it's quite a nice gold colour to this. Now, and some of it is just floating because there's just puddles of the moisture, and there are other parts where it's making contact with the fabric, so it might stick there and sink in. The other thing to be aware of is, more often than not, your fabric will dry lighter than it looks, so sometimes it can look a bit alarming, but actually a lot of this will get knocked back as it dries down. I'll put some copper brown in. This is a very coppery colour, so we might get a few glints of metallic coming through in the dried version. So I'll put my next piece on top. You might get two pieces in at once. So I haven't so I haven't wet this piece that's going in now, so it will absorb some of the colour already from what's underneath. And I've got some kind of a yellow, very light yellow. I thought it'd be interesting to see what that looks like when it's got colour added to it. So I'm just going to do this a few more times, but I'm just going to speed it up because all I will be doing is exactly the same process of layering up colour, moving it around, and maybe adding a little bit of pigment in as well. And then we'll be setting this to one side, and we'll see later on in the video how these fabrics have turned out. So while we're waiting for our acrylic ink dyed fabrics to dry, I thought I'd just share a couple of quick ways that you can add pattern and colour to your fabrics using different mediums. So this on this one, this is plain piece of kind of like muslin. I'm going to do a wax resist. So I've got a Neocolor 1 crayon here. The Neocolor one is not water soluble, it's not water reactive, so this won't start moving around when we add moisture. You could use any kind of kids wax crayon to do this. You just want a wax crayon that isn't going to, as I say, react to any water you add on top. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to doodle some circles onto the fabrics. This is white on a pale colour. So you may not see it that clearly, but hopefully when we add the resist, the circles that we're creating here will become more visible. You could do any kind of pattern or mark making on your fabric. I'm not being particularly careful. Just trying to make sure I've got a good amount of wax on my circles. You can probably just about see it there. Now what I've got here is I've got some Inktense blocks. I've already sprayed some them with water, but I also have some watercolors, and both will do the job here. So I mean, we could start with the watercolors, for example. I'm going to get a big old brush to really kind of give me a nice mop of color. I'm going to go with the same kind of neutrals I've gone with in the acrylic, so that I'm building up my stash of papers. And let's put these watercolors into sight a little bit more. And I'm not really thinking too much about. I've got a very dirty pot of water as well, so I should have given that a bit of a clean before I started. But as you can see, I'm just putting the heavily diluted watercolor directly onto the fabric. Just catching some different browns, and those circles are starting to emerge. A bit like when you're doing heat embossing on paper, here the wax is working in a similar way to the plastic of the embossing powder. Let's put a bit of a It's quite nice to do this with a big mop brush that's really wet. Just really allows the colour or the moisture to absorb into the fabric and that colour to blend out. It looks really nice, doesn't it? Right, so that's with watercolour, and again, this won't be what should I say, washing machine safe or anything. This is literally for me to use in my journaling or mixed media projects. So I've got my watercolour on. Let's try some of the ink tints. Now, ink tints again are a water reactive pigment. The difference with ink tints is that once they're dry on your project, they won't move again. So it wouldn't necessarily matter so much on a project like this on the fabric. But if you were working on a page where you then wanted to continue working over the top, watercolors might react and start moving along with that next layer, whereas the ink tints, once dry, should enable you to layer over the top without fear that it's going to move. I'm doing exactly the same process here. You can see kind of barely any difference between the area where I've got the watercolors or the ink tints. So try what you have. You could also use sprays. Just don't use acrylics really over the wax because it's it will cover the wax. It won't resist the wax won't resist the acrylic as well because the acrylic's kind of designed to go over most things. And this will dry lighter again, so you can kind of be fairly generous with the amount of pigment you put in. Just allowing it to merge. It will carry on moving, I think, after I stop adding the colour while that moisture's still there in the fabric. And if you feel at the end or once it's dry, it's not intense enough, you can go back in and work over it again until you get a kind of the colour that you're looking for. So we'll be able to see this one when it's dry as well, but hopefully you can see how effective that resist has been. So your pattern is nice and clearly visible. Right, I shall tidy this away and then we'll do a quick bit of stenciling on fabric. So once you've got your fabrics dyed and coloured, then you can still continue working over the top of them, just as you would do with your papers. And I'm going to add some stenciling to this fabric. I couldn't decide whether I wanted the design to be lighter or darker, so I've got both um, the titanium white and the Payne's grey, which is really, oh no, it's Prussian blue. Sorry, it's a dark blue. Um, these are Pebeo acrylics. They're fairly heavy bodied, which makes working with stencils easier because they're not too runny. And because we're applying them thinly and through a stencil, I'm not too concerned about making my fabric too thick or stiff. For example, this is some fabric I've done exactly the same on and here as well. And you can see these are still perfectly kind of pliable to be able to work with. So let me just, this is our melting circles stencil. It's a new stencil, and I'm just going to do as you've probably seen many a time before, which is dab a cosmetic sponge into the paint, dab off a bit so it's not too gloopy with paint, and then simply lightly dab that sponge over the stencil. The lovely thing about this is the stenciling, the white shows off the texture of the fabric, so that starts to come alive a little bit more. And so this paint is not too fluid, so it is unlikely to bleed, so it should give me a fairly crisp impression on the fabric. Now you can totally do this on shop bought fabrics that are already coloured, and I do that quite regularly as well. One of the nice things about doing this, of course, is the fabric that you've dyed has kind of variations of colour and inconsistencies in it, which I think kind of make the stenciling look a little bit more interesting. So it's just like working over your own kind of painted papers, really. Then they just don't have that same uniformity as a printed base. I think I've got enough of it down in the white. Just do one more. And another another thing that I like about this approach is you get unevenness in your application of paint as well, so it won't be a solid flat colour. So you can see how that really looks interesting on the fabric. So let's go in with the Prussian blue. I've still got some white probably on the stencil, so I might get a bit of a mix as the colour goes down. I've just turned my sponge over, and then we'll just add the darker colour. I just couldn't decide which would look better for me, given I've got this other one with the white stenciling. I wondered whether I wanted one with some dark stenciling on instead. That's why it's good to have as many fabrics on hand as you can get, because like collage papers, you can make as many patterned fabrics as you want and need. So this Prussian blue. It's going on to the dark, the kind of the coloured base, looking quite dark, so it will probably will look more like Payne's grey once we're finished. I'll add a bit more here and then just show you rather than doing the whole piece of cloth. Let's have a look. It's all like that as well. Different look, isn't it? And the nice thing about the melting circles, which is a mask, is it's revealing, the pattern's revealed by the base colour. So the unevenness in that dyed fabric will really kind of come alive under that stenciling. So that's another way of adding pattern and interest to your fabrics. I will be back with a recap once all my fabrics have dried, and we can look to see what are different kind of effects we've created with the acrylic inks and with the wax resist, and what kind of stash I've managed to make today. My fabrics are all dry now, so I've got them ready to add to my stash for future projects. Here's the one where we stenciled over a dyed fabric. Here's the wax resist with the watercolours and with the ink tents. It's come through really nicely, hasn't it? I love the mottled look you get with just applying the watercolours. Here's that piece of an old shirt. That's really really grungy, doesn't it? So I love how that's kind of picked up the colours in different levels of intensity. Here's a piece of just plain canvas, and you can see the speckles from the lindies, from the pigment powders that I sprinkled over, and also there's a bit of shimmer in there as well. Don't know if you can catch that on camera. Here's a bit of that light yellow cotton. So that's worked really well, actually. It's a bit of a softer effect, but the underlying light yellows meant it all kind of looks nice and harmonious. Here's another bit. I think this is a more the kind of musliny type of cloth, and some wonderful textures in there. So really, they're kind of the results you can't get by design. They are simply by letting the fabrics just kind of soak in the mixture of inks, powders, etc. that you apply. And depending on the colours used and the pigments and how much you apply, you'll get more intense or paler effects. And of course, the fabrics will take the inks differently as well. So you can see from this kind of um, lacy pattern here, which starts off as plain white. It's got some lighter and darker areas, whereas this piece, which was in a different part of the stack of fabrics, has ended up with a slightly more intense colour. So I can use all of these together because they've got the same colours in them, um, but they're going to give me very different looks when I combine and stitch over them. So I hope you've enjoyed that. It's given you some ideas for finding scrap pieces of fabric around the house, um, adding colours to them, stenciling, doing a bit of wax resist, and create your own bespoke elements which you can tear up, stitch into, and add a little bit of texture to your next project. So thanks very much for watching, and I shall see you again very soon. Bye for now.